Hey, it's me, Vicky Marie. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in this crazy world we're living in. So, here we are to talk about day 6 in the mushroom murder trial. So, remember, I don't have to go through the whole story every day. I'm sure if you've been watching my channel, you'll know exactly what happened in this case. So, this is the trial of Erin Patterson, who is accused of killing 3 of her husband's relatives and seriously, so she's accused of murder of 3 people and also attempted murder of 1 person. And the way she did this, the reason why it's captivating the whole world is because it is such an unusual case. The way that she allegedly murdered these 3 people and seriously threatened the life of a 4th is by putting death cap mushrooms in a beef Wellington. So she invited these relatives over for lunch. She prepared individual portions of beef Wellington with a mushroom sauce included. Apparently, this is typical of a beef Wellington. And the accusation is that the mushroom sauce was made from death cap mushrooms, which are lethal, but kill very slowly, very painfully. If she is guilty, it's a really horrible thing to do to someone. So, as I've said before, the question isn't whether there were poisonous mushrooms in that food. I think that has been more or less established. The thing to be established was whether she did it deliberately and did she intend to kill. If she did, maybe she intended just to make them poorly and underestimated the potency of these mushrooms. So yes, this is a case that's put us all off mushrooms and chocolate brownies and beef Wellington. So I've been doing an update on this trial every day. We're in day 6, so you need to have a look at my playlist if you've missed out on the other days. I have a playlist which I'll try and remember to put in the description box of this video. But if not, if you just tap in murder mushroom trial or Erin Patterson in my channel search engine, they will all come up, all the videos that I've done about this case. And I'm carrying on with it till the end. So every day there are any updates, I will be giving those updates. So yesterday was a bit of a bombshell, I thought. With the things that they were saying that she was part of a true crime group. They regarded her as a super sleuth. And the other thing that came up yesterday was since she bought her dehydrator, she'd been putting dried mushrooms in everything, even her children's chocolate brownies, which just seems odd. Why would you put dried mushrooms in chocolate brownies? What would be the purpose of that? Obviously not the death cap mushrooms, must have been just normal mushrooms. But was that like a test run to see how well she could reduce the mushrooms so that no strange taste was detected? Though it seems like these death cap mushrooms, if you ate them, they would have just tasted like mushrooms anyway. Because that's what they are. They don't taste poisonous. So... yeah, interesting. And of course, she's innocent till she's proven guilty. Okay, so we're going to look at what happened on day 6. And day 6, it's an interesting one because the survivor, the only survivor of that lunch that she invited these people to, supposedly to talk about her health, and when she declared she had cancer, which actually it turns out she didn't have. She invited them all to that lunch. Only one survived, and that's who we're going to hear from today. So this will be very interesting testimony because this guy, he was there at that lunch. He knows about the build up to it, knows what happened on the day. He miraculously survived. Okay, so as usual, though, to start, just want to say my thank yous. Thank you to all of you for caring about this case, Thank you for watching. Thank you for liking. It's very important to like and subscribe. I was just thinking that earlier. I was watching a different YouTube channel, a new one that I hadn't seen before. Immediately, once I've started watching the video and I'm finding it interesting, I like the video, subscribe to the channel. But also, really important, if you want to see these updates, don't forget to press that notification bell, and don't forget to press all notifications, so otherwise you won't receive notifications. Okay, thank you to my members. Thank you to those of you who buy me Ko-fis, send me super chats, send me nice emails, leave nice messages. Thank you for interacting on my channel. And yeah, thank you. Okay, so let's get on with it. So I've been following this trial through the Guardian newspaper, which has been very handy. You know, it gives a step-by-step account of what happens in the courtroom. So the first witness, very brief witness, on day 6, the court was shown the receipt for the dehydrator that Erin Patterson bought, and the prosecution called Darren Fox, the owner and manager of an appliances store in Leongatha, and he says that in November 2023, an employee told him she believed she had sold Erin Patterson a food dehydrator. Now, I'm presuming that she's seen the news about it and then she's come out with it. The employers said, oh, I think I sold her that. And Darren says store records showed Erin had purchased a Sunbeam Food Lab electronic dehydrator. And the court is shown a tax invoice which says, delivered to Erin, dated the 28th of April, 2023. So again, we've been through the family tree. Just a reminder, Don Patterson died. That's Erin's estranged husband, Simon's father. He ate a portion and a half of the beef Wellington because he finished off Gail's portion as well. She only ate half of it, and that was Simon's mother, but she died too. And her sister, Heather Wilkinson, Simon's aunt, she died. And this is the survivor, Ian Wilkinson. He survived, but you know, it wasn't like you know, he went through absolute hell to survive. Simon is her estranged husband. Here's Erin. Simon was invited to the lunch but declined to go. And they have 2 children that are not named. So this is the Corranborough Baptist Church, and Ian Wilkinson, the survivor, he is a pastor at this church. And then after the brief sort of testimony by the person from the dehydrator store, Ian Wilkinson's testimony began. And prosecutor Jane Warren began her examination of Ian Wilkinson. He told the court he is the pastor at the Corranborough Baptist Church. He met his wife Heather in 1976 and they later had 4 children, the court hears. And Heather, 66 years old, was teaching English to migrants when she died in 2023. So Ian says he met Erin through his nephew, Simon Patterson. This is Simon, of course, Erin's estranged husband. And he was asked about his relationship with Erin. And he said, I would say our relationship was friendly, amicable. It didn't have much depth. We were more like acquaintances. We didn't see a great deal of each other. And he says that when Erin attended their church, they would have casual conversation. And Ian says Heather, his wife, had a very similar relationship with Erin. Heather would have seen Erin more than me, talked to her more than me, but we didn't consider that the relationship was close. Now, Erin apparently is an atheist. So this is something that's come out in the trial. There was a little bit of a acrimony between her and her husband, because her husband, apparently, he's a pastor as well, I believe. And, he's very religious, whereas Erin's like the total extreme, so it wasn't as if there was a middle ground between them. And then he went on to say she just seemed like a normal person. That's how he described her. When we met, she seemed quite friendly. We never had arguments or disputes. She just seemed like an ordinary person. And then he had, when he was asked about their marriage, Simon and Erin's marriage, he said he had a couple of conversations with Simon about the pair's marriage challenges when they lived separately for periods of time. Ian says he did not often visit Erin's house. He said he had only eaten with Erin previously for wider family gatherings like Christmas parties, family occasions. And then he says that his wife, his late wife, Heather, was fairly excited about the lunch. So Ian recalled Heather telling him at church they'd been invited to Erin's home for a meal in July 2023. He said that Heather was fairly excited about the invitation. He said there was no reason for the lunch. We were happy to be invited. It seemed like maybe our relationship with Erin was going to improve. And he said they were very happy to accept the lunch invite. That's really quite sad, isn't it? To be excited about that invite, which led to her death. Whether Erin was responsible or not doesn't matter. In some ways, Heather died at the end of the day. Whether it was an accident or whether it was deliberate, the result is the same. Now, he says at first they thought they were the only people invited, and then they later found out that Heather's sister, Gail, and her husband, Don, had also been invited, and Erin's estranged husband, Simon, was also invited. So here he is, Ian. This is Ian, bless him. I mean, he's been through hell. He really has been through hell. But, I hope his religion, his religious beliefs or his faith has helped him, because not only he's been through his own personal hell with the illness from the mushrooms, but then, to just find out that his wife of all those years, she died. That just horrible for him, isn't it? Right, okay, where are we? Oh, so I want to stay in order. So I think, have we done that one? More like acquaintances, we did that. Sorry, I'm just trying to, I don't know why it's not just. Okay. So then he went on to say, apparently, she was reluctant. Oh, her diary was shown to court. So the court is shown a photo of Heather's diary. That's his wife. A handwritten entry on the 29th of July reads, "Erin's for lunch, 12 o'clock. Ian Wilson says the couple needed to be ready at midday for Don and Gail to pick them up for the lunch." Underneath is the word fruit, and Ian says this refers to the fruit platter he and Heather were planning to take to Erin's house. On the morning of the 29th of July, Ian says he had breakfast but cannot recall what he ate. He says it was a typical breakfast meal and he probably had a nice bowl of porridge. So they were picked up by Don and Gail a little after 12 from their house, and then they travelled to Erin's house on the 29th of July. And the 4 lunch guests arrived at Erin's house at around 12:30, Ian says. And arriving at Erin's house, Ian said Heather remarked, "Oh, Simon's car's not here." Now remember, Simon had been invited, but he decided, luckily for him, not to go. Don or Gail said that Simon was not attending to the lunch, Ian says, and a reminder that Simon is Don and Gail's son and Ian and Heather's nephew. Erin then met the 4 guests and they went into the kitchen and lounge room area in the house. There was general conversation. Then we started conversing about the house. Erin mentioned there was a pantry behind the wall. Heather was very interested in pantries at the time because we'd just built one at our home. On hearing about the pantry, she started walking towards it and Gail started following. Ian said Erin was very reluctant about the visit to the pantry. Now, there could be a lot of reasons for that, not only because she's got death cap mushrooms in there. Maybe it was a mess and she didn't want them to, she hadn't tidied it up or whatever. I'm sure you understand. I certainly would feel the same. If you have people round, you sort out the rooms that they're going to be in. You wouldn't necessarily want them going up into your bedroom or into a I haven't got pantry. I wouldn't even necessarily want them going in the kitchen. And when I cook, I don't really like people around me in the kitchen. I'm not one of these people, some people like to have people sat there watching them, helping. I'm not like that. And it seems like Erin wasn't like that. But I don't think, that necessarily suggests that the reason was because she was poisoning with them. She just might be a person that feels uncomfortable with that. And Ian says he did not follow because he thought Erin may have been embarrassed about mess in the pantry. Well, there you go. He's sensible, really. So the 4 guests then joined Erin in her garden where they discussed some of her plants. And once inside again, Ian Wilkinson said lunch preparations began. He says he saw Erin mashing potatoes, putting food on plates. He says he did not see any other food being prepared. Well, she would have had the beef Wellingtons prepared, whatever, whether whether she deliberately poisoned them or not. I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong. You let me know what you think in comments. But when you have people over to dinner, you try and do as much as you can before they arrive so you can spend time with them. The other thing is I like to, as I say, be in the kitchen myself doing them. I don't really like people in there with me. So I prefer that my guests have a drink, I give them a little snack, and they just get along with talking to each other, and let me get on with what I'm doing. And I always try and cook things beforehand. If I have people over, it's always easier, isn't it, to make a curry or something like that. Something you can just prepare earlier, leave in the pan. All you've got to do is make the rice or the chips or whatever, heat up the naan bread or whatever. So a bolognese, I certainly would not want to make anything too complicated when you've got people over for dinner, because it just makes your life complicated and puts pressure on, and you want to relax, don't you? Anyway, so the jury is shown a photo of Erin's dining room table with a kitchen bench to the left. Ian says Erin was on the kitchen side of the bench while she was putting food on plates. Gail and Heather were on the dining room side of the bench, leaning against it. He says both women offered to help Erin plate the food. The offer was rejected. He says Erin plated all of the food. I would have rejected that as well. Sometimes it gets, people offer to help. That's nice of them to offer to help. And they do it out of courtesy, don't they? But really, I'd rather they washed up. That's why I'd say, no, I'm fine. But, if you want to wash up afterwards, or just take the plates in. Not that I worry about washing up on that. I've had lots of people over to dinner over the years. Not now, we've got too many dogs in the house. It's hard to have people over for dinner. But, Yeah, the thing is, the last thing you want to do after you've had a nice evening, you're chatting, you're having a drink and some pudding or coffees or whatever, you're not bothered about the washing up, are you? I don't. I'm a morning person. To me, it can wait till the morning. But sometimes, yeah, I've had people over and they've just gone off and done it, and that's brilliant. So on the plate served to the guests were mashed potatoes, green beans, and an individual beef Wellington dish each. Sorry. Ian says he did not see where the beef Wellingtons came from before they were placed on the plates. Where were they? Probably in the oven being kept warm. I don't know. Erin took odd, differently coloured plate to her place at the table, Ian Wilkinson tells the court. And he describes the individual beef Wellington served to the lunch guests. It was very much like a pasty. It was a pastry case, and when we cut into it, there was steak and mushrooms. He says the dish was entirely encased in pastry. Prosecutor Jane Warren asked Ian about the plates Erin used to serve the food. There were 4 large grey dinner plates and 1 smaller plate, a different colour. It was an orangey tan sort of colour. Gail picked up 2 of the grey plates and put them on the table. Heather picked up 2 of the grey plates and put them on the table. And Erin picked up the odd plate and placed it on the table. She took it to her place on the table. So, Erin's plate was definitely quite different to the others' plates, wasn't it? Which doesn't mean anything in itself, but anyway, here are our victims, of course, Don, Gail, and Heather, and Ian, the survivor. So he says he ate the entire meal at the fatal mushroom lunch. He says they all said grace before they began to eat lunch. Now, if Erin is guilty of this, if she actually sat and prayed with them before they ate dishes that she knew she had laced with poisonous mushrooms, that's just horrible, isn't it? Of course, she is an atheist, apparently, so she wouldn't care, would she? But just, it is a bit breathtaking. If she is guilty, of course, we don't know she's guilty. We have to remember that. But it is pretty breathtaking, not only sitting there saying grace, but then watching them eat those things. So he says he and his wife Heather ate the entire meal. Gail, Erin's mother-in-law, ate her vegetables and half of her beef Wellington. Don ate his meal and his wife Gail's leftover half, Ian says. So there was talk about husbands helping out their wives by eating extra food. Heather mentioned we should have shared a beef Wellington because she felt the meal was a bit on the large side for her. That's the reason I remember who ate what, because of that little exchange. He says he can't recall how much of the meal Erin ate, but he says he cannot remember comments about Erin not eating much. Gail had prepared a cake and Heather had brought a fruit platter to the lunch the court hears. Ian says not much of either was consumed, as the guests were fairly full from the main course. He says it was a help-yourself serving arrangement for the cake and fruit with plates on the table, but he cannot remember if the same plates from lunch were used for that. I wonder what happened to those plates. Just thinking, were those plates still there at Erin's house afterwards? When the police finally arrested her, did she still have those grey plates? Because if she's guilty and she knew, or even wouldn't she have thrown them? You wouldn't take a chance, would you, on any, even a little scrap of those death cap mushrooms being left on those plates, even if they'd been washed, put through the dishwasher, whatever. I don't think you would take a chance. So I wonder what happened to those plates, if they got thrown away or if they were still there. Anyway, he goes on to say that she told the four guests she had life-threatening cancer. So after the lunch, Erin announced she had cancer. She said she was very concerned because she believed it was very serious, life-threatening. Now, this is not true. She did not have cancer. So if Ian is telling the truth, which we have no reason to believe he wouldn't be, that's not very nice, is it? She was anxious about telling the kids. She was asking our advice about that. And she spoke about a diagnostic test which showed a tumour. Anyway, Erin and Simon's son and his friend then returned home, which cut short the conversation about Erin's illness, the court hears. Ian then led the guests to pray for Erin. Gosh. So they sat there, they've ingested one way or another these mushrooms. They're dead people walking by now, aren't they? Like talk about dead man walking. Once they've eaten those mushrooms, those beef Wellingtons, that's when it all will have started in their bodies. They were dying already. It's awful to think about, isn't it? And as they're dying, they're praying for Erin. He recalls leaving Erin's house at about 2:45 as he and Heather had guests coming at 3 p.m. Ian and Heather went to bed at around 10:30 or 11 that evening, and jurors were told. So they went to lunch at Erin's at 12, and by 10:30 they still hadn't properly fell ill. But he does say that before they had fallen asleep, Heather abruptly got up from bed and vomited in the laundry. And he said, I felt all right when Heather initially got up, but it wasn't very long after that I also felt the need to go and vomit. Oh my God, all those hours later. So those mushrooms have been gradually killing them slowly inside, but didn't manifest in any symptoms until 10:30 or 11 p.m. that evening. So they carried on their day normally. The couple were vomiting and had diarrhea through the evening, the court hears, and he says that he and Heather did not return to bed that night as they needed to stay close to the toilets in the house. Well, I think we all know there's nothing worse than when you've got an upset stomach. You've got to just stay close to the toilet. You know, it's horrible, isn't it? So here's the map showing Erin's home, and here's the hospital. So it's quite a distance, isn't it, away, the hospital? Well, from Erin's house, of course. So then Simon urged the family members to visit the hospital because around dawn the next morning, Heather Wilkinson had a phone conversation with the other lunch guests and discovered they were also unwell. And Erin's estranged husband, Simon Patterson, visited Ian and Heather later that morning, and Ian describes himself as quite unwell when Simon arrived. Don and Gail had called an ambulance, and Simon told his aunt and uncle, Ian and Heather, that they should do the same. So this is, still quite a long time afterwards, and it's really biting now. Those mushrooms are really taking effect now. Simon then rang an ambulance, but due to ambulance delays, in the end, Simon drove Ian and Heather to Leongatha Hospital. Now, so Heather, it's so interesting to get this testimony. So Heather was still alive then and talking normally, and she reminded him about the different coloured plates while in hospital. So Prosecutor Jane Warren asks Ian about his conversation with Heather about the mismatched plates the beef Wellington lunch was served on, and Ian recalls the conversation in the hospital. I remember Heather reminding me that there were different plates. She just noticed the difference in colours between the plate Erin was using and our plates. And, women notice things like that, don't they? I don't think men do really so much, do they? Or, but women do notice more details, tend to, don't they? Yeah. At first, hospital staff were focusing on the meat from the beef Wellington meal as a possible cause of their illness. Ian says, I think that's completely logical, isn't it? You wouldn't think of the mushrooms at all, would you? The mushroom sauce. You would think instantly it must have been the meat that had gone off or whatever. Bad meat. Anyway, so then Ian was treated for death cap mushroom poisoning because he and his wife were then transported to Dandenong Hospital via ambulance due to suspicion of potential mushroom poisoning. So they're obviously going to get the hospital staff in to talk. What would have made them think that, I wonder? And Ian says, while he was at Leongatha Hospital, he overheard staff talking about Erin being there as well. And under questioning, Ian says he has no memory about his time at the Dandenong Hospital after he consumed a charcoal substance drink. So that's obviously something to alleviate his symptoms. And then he had no memory after that, because he was then sedated, intubed and transferred to Austin Hospital in Heidelberg, where he was treated for death cap mushroom poisoning, the court hears. He was later transferred to a rehabilitation ward before being discharged home on the 21st of September, jurors are told. Dear me, he really has been through hell one way or another. Let's see, I've done that. So he then said, so then the Erin's lawyer, Mr. Colin Mandy, began his cross-examination, and he took Ian to the point in time when the 4 lunch guests arrived at Erin's house in Leongatha, which had been recently built. Mr. Mandy puts to Ian that Erin was proud of the house she had invited the group to. Ian replies, I don't think it was that clear. Mr. Mandy takes Ian to his previous evidence given in pre-trial hearings, where he agreed that Erin was proud of her house. On reflection, I felt those answers were not satisfactory. I hadn't thought a great deal about the house and Erin being proud of the house before you asked me those questions. On reflection, I felt those answers weren't a fair representation of the events. But he says the guests didn't have a house tour and Erin was not driving the conversation around her house. So this is Mr. Colin Mandy, who is representing Erin. So Ian Wilkinson says he saw the meal served at the fatal lunch came from an oven tray. So Mr. Mandy turns to Ian's evidence about how Erin placed the beef Wellington lunch on plates. He asks Ian if he remembers each beef Wellington being served from a tray. Can I suggest to you, he said, you saw them come from a tray, possibly an oven tray. Mandy says, but Ian says he cannot recall this. After some back and forth, Mr. Mandy takes Ian to his evidence to police on the 5th of September 2023, while at Austin Hospital, where he said the beef Wellingtons were served on a tray. And Ian agrees this is what he told the police officers. He says this has jogged his memory and believes he can picture it. Well, it's very, poor guy, really, because he's trying to think back at something, he's been so ill and he's had all this trauma. He's trying to think back, but, are these genuine memories? Very difficult. Then the court adjourned for a lunch break, and then when they came back, Ian was back in the witness stand, and he agreed under cross-examination that Erin did not give directions on where the plates should be placed on the table. He also agrees the 4 guests could have sat in any of the seats at the table, but Colin says there were. Is it Colin? Yeah, Mr. Mandy says there were not 4 plates that were the same. Ian rejects this and says he remembers 4 grey plates and 1 smaller plate of a different colour. So what Mr. Mandy is trying to sort of establish is that, those plates, anyone could have had any one of those plates. But maybe the grey plates, but really if the other plate was different, and Erin brought that over herself, apparently. Anyway, we'll see. Yeah, there he is. Oh, he's looking well. He looks well, at least in himself. Hopefully, he's never going to recover, is he? He's lost his lifetime partner. But he looks reasonably healthy, which is good. So he was then cross-examined on Erin's health revelation, and Mr. Mandy pressed him about his evidence that Erin told the 4 lunch guests, Don and Gail, as well as Ian and Heather, she had cancer. And Mr. Mandy says, let me suggest that what you told police when you made your statement is that Erin said she had a suspected cancer. And Ian agrees this is what he told police when making his statement. When pressed by Mandy about this, Ian says, I think she was saying she had cancer because she brought up a diagnostic scan which showed a tumour. And Ian says he was probably understating things when he made his police statement. And Ian says that Erin was fairly clear that the cancer diagnosis was given. Mr. Mandy says that Ian's police statement did not include references to Erin's diagnostic test for cancer. Ian says he accepts this, and then Mr. Mandy finishes his cross-examination. So next witness is ambulance responder Cindy Hyde. On July 2023, in July 2023, she was working as a patient transport officer for the Royal Flying Doctor Service Victoria, the court hears. The service was contracted by Ambulance Victoria. Hyde responded to an ambulance call out for Don and Gail Patterson, Erin's parents-in-law, on 30th of July 2023. The pair told him they had attended a lunch the previous day and had been vomiting from about midnight. And she says her partner asked what they had eaten, and Don replied, beef stroganoff. Well, it wasn't beef stroganoff, was it? But anyway. Cindy and her partner then transported the pair to Corumburra Hospital, the court hears, and there is no cross-examination. It's interesting, isn't it? So, I suppose there's nothing of value for the defence that she could say, but then the prosecution called Lisa Shannon, a registered nurse, as the next witness. So in July 2023, Lisa was working as an after-hours coordinator at Corumburra Hospital and Urgent Care Centre. And she says that Don was considerably sicker than Gail when the pair arrived. Now, don't forget, Gail did not eat all her beef Wellington, but Gail Gail didn't eat hers. Don ate 1.5 beef Wellingtons. So he polished off Gail's as well, didn't he? So that's probably why he was sicker. And Don and Gail said they had taken an anti-nausea medication earlier that morning. Lisa administered a cannula to deliver IV fluids to Don and Gail and ran a blood test using a portable device to measure their electrolyte levels, the court hears. And while in the urgent clinic, Lisa accompanied Don to the bathroom every 10 minutes. Goodness me, poor man. I mean, just it's horrible when you've got an upset stomach. You know, especially when it's coming out both ends. It's just, and the pain. Oh, what a horrible way to die. Don and Gail were then admitted to the ward at the Corranborough Hospital to be observed. They were requiring one-on-one care. They were very unwell, Shannon says. Oh dear, just awful, isn't it? Anyway, then she recalls his condition deteriorating. She says, Lisa says, is this Lisa? Yeah. Lisa says, Simon's father was lethargic, had lowered blood pressure, and describes his symptoms. It's quite unusual for typical vomiting and diarrhea. And Lisa said that Don's blood test results were abnormal and a transfer to a tertiary hospital with a larger ICU was arranged. Again, no cross-examination. So the defence, he doesn't want to go into these details, does he? He wants to pass over this because these will have a very emotional effect on the jury, won't they? Because it's horrible to hear about this. And not only all those horrible effects, and, then he's having to be moved from hospital to hospital. This poor guy. Oh, just awful. All of them, what they had to go through. So here he is. This is Don and Gail. Bless. Rest in peace. I hope they're at peace. Rest in eternal peace. God, what horrible experience they had. So the prosecution's next witness is Dr. Beth Morgan. And she was involved in the care of Don and Gail at the Dandenong Hospital as the medical registrar when they arrived on the 30th of July via ambulance transfer. And she says that Don Patterson had a borderline high pulse, and she said he was exhibiting mild abdominal pain on his right side, that must be, as well as nausea and diarrhea when the pair arrived at Dandenong Hospital. And doctors were told about the beef Wellington lunch. And she said that testing showed that Don's vital signs were relatively stable. He did not have a fever. He had a pulse rate of 100 beats per minute, which is borderline high, the court hears. And she went on to say his respiratory rate was 23 breaths per minute, which was quite normal, and his oxygen levels were normal. However, then when he had a venous blood gas test, it was found that his pH level was low, which meant his blood was very acidic. And a full blood examination showed the hemoglobin attached to red cells to carry oxygen was quite high at 200, the court hears. And the doctor said this was due to Don being dehydrated. And he also returned abnormal liver function tests. So that's what these death cap mushrooms do. They attack slowly the vital organs, don't they? Anyway, further testimony. She ordered repeat venous blood gas tests after IV fluids were administered to Don, but the results showed there was a persistent severe metabolic acidosis. And she said she needed to rule out ischemic bowel disease or dead bowel to determine the cause of Don's illness. She saw him at 10 p.m. She agrees he appeared relatively well and at that time did not have abdominal tenderness. A CT scan of Don's abdominal area was performed, which was normal and ruled out ischemic bowel, the court hears. God, these doctors, that's those death cap mushrooms, isn't it? They are amazing, aren't they? You know, they have to go through all these different, you know, you're just in the dark, aren't you, at first? You know, so you have to just eliminate, you know, the symptoms like the nausea, the diarrhea, sickness, but then you've got to find out the cause, and it's a process of elimination, isn't it? And they do look nice, those mushrooms, don't you? Do you know what I mean? You look at them, they look quite attractive to eat. They don't look sort of like they're what they are. So by 10:30 p.m, that's when they began to suspect death cap mushrooms. So by around 10:30, she was in contact with the toxicology department and they requested she find out more about the meal served at the lunch. She said, I was concerned this wasn't just gastroenteritis caused by food poisoning. There was a discussion about the presentation and how it was quite severe, but the onset of symptoms was quite delayed. This would be more indicative of a serious toxin syndrome as opposed to a food poisoning. The toxicologist raised the possibility that if it was toxin poisoning, it was most likely due to the ingestion of Amanita phalloides or death cap mushrooms. And there they are, the culprits. They are so clever, though, to work it all out. This is a reminder. I'm going to tell you an anecdotal story now. Well, it's a true story, but something that happened to my ex-partner many, many years ago. And when I got together with my ex-partner, he was a little bit older than me, and he had cancer, but survived it. He had Hodgkin's lymphoma. And he survived it, but he was told by the hospital in Reading, if he ever had any kind of symptoms, you know, he was in remission, he was fully in remission by then. If he had any kind of symptoms, to just literally not wait, just go straight to the hospital, to the sort of cancer department, oncology or whatever wards, and admit himself immediately, and that, you know, not to go to the doctor, not to ring an ambulance, just directly go there. You know, he had that sort of relationship with the department at that time. And anyway, he started with a bit of an illness, like it was like flu symptoms he had. I'll never forget him phoning me from work and saying, oh, look, I've got to come home because I feel terrible. And I remember looking out of our window and seeing him get out the car and walk up the street. And he was like he was drunk. He was just staggering all over the road. He was really sort of all over the place. Anyway, that night, we thought it was just flu, or he thought it was just flu. That night, he was sweating so much, night sweats, that the bed was soaked wet through. You know, he was really, just the sweat was pouring off him. And that's when he said, oh, this reminds me of when I had cancer. I used to get these night sweats. When I had cancer, I think I should go straight to the hospital. So I drove him straight to the hospital in Reading, to the cancer hospital. And they admitted him immediately. They were brilliant, actually. They admitted him immediately into hospital, and he was kept there overnight. And they started doing tests, you know, and they couldn't find anything. You know, they didn't think his cancer had come back, but they didn't know why he was feeling like this, you know. And then they put him on did they put him on antibiotics? No, not yet. They haven't, because they hadn't diagnosed him yet. And then the doctor, who was a cancer doctor, this is how clever they are, though, because they're, you know, and they are like detectives, aren't they? They've got to work out what's wrong with someone. And the doctor said to him, "What's that in your eye?" He had like a little like hemorrhage, I suppose you'd call it, in his eye, just a pinprick of blood. And then my ex said, "Yeah, and I've got these things on my fingertips as well." And on his fingertips, he had like, they look like blood blisters. You know, when you get a blood blister, it's like a black blister. And he had them on his fingertips. And the doctor said, "Oh my God." He said, "They are Osler's nodes, they're called." And what my partner had, what my ex-partner was wrong with him. He had a heart infection. Now the thing is, because he'd had chemotherapy, and also he'd had to have his spleen removed when he was ill, so his defenses were really low. And you know, your spleen, I don't want to bore you with the whole medical details, but it's your spleen that deals with a lot of, you know, purification, deals with a lot of infections. So if you have to have your spleen removed, you can live without it perfectly well, but then you can't fight infection the same. So just getting a simple infection that would just be something simple for us who've got a functioning spleen, for someone who doesn't have a spleen, it can, you know, really run rampant through your body. And this is what had happened to my ex-partner. He had an infection, and he had a myocardial infection. And bearing in mind, he's in the cancer ward, and they don't deal with heart things there, but this doctor picked up on these black Osler's nodes in his fingertips. And what happens is bits of the infection break off, travel all over your body, and they come out somewhere. And this little hemorrhage he had in his eye, that was one of these bits of infection coming out of his body. These black Osler's nodes, as they're called, they're the infection just coming out of your body. It travels around your system in your veins, and then just tries to come out of the body. I mean, it's incredible. Anyway, he noticed them, and he remembered them from medical school. And he said, this was typical of my ex-partner, if whatever would be the most rare thing medical going, he would get it. He said, "It's so rare. I've never seen it before. I'll probably never see it again, but I remember it from medical school." Oh, so the next minute, the whole of the hospital, all the students coming in to look at it, the doctor's saying to him, "Oh, have a look at this, because you may never see this again in your career, but this is something to look out for. If you see these Osler's nodes, it means someone's got very severe heart infection." And then my partner, he was transferred to the hospital to the heart hospital as opposed to the cancer hospital. They put him on intravenous antibiotics. He was really, really ill for quite a few days, but he survived. And because of that doctor's quick thinking and recognizing what those things were. So the point I'm trying to make with, waffling on, I know some of you like my waffle and some don't, but the point I'm trying to make is how doctors are like detectives. They've got to, not only the doctors, but the people in the labs and stuff, they've got to, someone presents there with sickness and diarrhea, probably a common thing, isn't it? There's probably not many more illnesses that are more common than sickness and diarrhea. Everybody has it at some point in their lives, if not more than once. And it could be food poisoning, but it could be gastroenteritis, or it could be something, deeper problem with the bowel or whatever. It could be cancer, could be, there's so many different things it could be. So they are like detectives, aren't they, trying to find out what it is. And they did well, because by 10:30 p.m. they'd started to suspect and the thing is, you've got to find out what it is to give the effective treatment, of course. There's no point in treating someone for something, for gastroenteritis, when actually what they've got is death cap mushroom poisoning. They need the proper treatment, don't they? So it was more indicative of a serious toxin syndrome as opposed to a food poisoning. And that's when it was first suggested that it might be these mushrooms. And Gail Patterson was transferred to ICU at 2 a.m. As test results showed her liver function and elevated lactate levels were worsening. and they transferred her to the intensive care unit. And a decision was made to administer psilocybin, which is the antidote to death cap mushroom poisoning. Monash Health, which oversees Dandenong Hospital, did not have enough of the antidote for 4 patients and needed to obtain it from an external hospital. I bet they have now. Because, of course, yeah, they're not expecting 4 people to come in suffering from it. But, of course, it makes sense that really they're, imagine somebody has foraged for mushrooms and prepared a meal, by accident, which I'm sure happens. It's quite likely that there would be more than one person. Maybe they prepared a meal for a family just like this, not a dinner, but just a normal family meal. So I think it's important that they do keep enough of the antidote, really, for at least 10 people, just to keep it there as a precaution. I mean, I don't know how long it lasts, though, but yeah, but better to have it there and never use it. So Heather and Ian were later transferred to Dandenong Hospital, the court hears, and the doctor said, another doctor, Chris Webster, at Leongatha Hospital had told her that Erin Patterson presented to the hospital and discharged herself. Again, no cross-examination. So the defence is not interested in hearing too much from these people, these experts, are they? They're not cross-examining at all. That's telling, I think, isn't it? Or maybe it's just that they're accepting that it is death cap mushrooms. I think what the defence is concentrating on the fact of the proof of whether she did it deliberately or not. I don't think they're arguing with the fact that death cap mushrooms are the reasons for these people dying. So so it's concluded now that on day 6 of Erin Patterson's murder trial. Let me just make sure. Yeah, this is just a summary. So let's have the summary. So here's what the jury heard today. Ian Wilkinson, the survivor of the mushroom lunch, described his relationship with Erin as friendly and amicable. He said they were more like acquaintances and that he and his wife Heather were very happy and excited about being invited to lunch. He told the jurors that when the 4 lunch guests arrived at Erin's house, Heather and Gail went to inspect Erin's pantry. He recalled Erin was very reluctant about this. And then recalling the beef Wellington lunch, Ian said Erin plated the plates. He told jurors that Erin rejected an offer by Heather and Gail to help plate the individual beef Wellingtons. He said that Erin ate off an orangey tan plate that was different to the grey plates the 4 guests used. And he testified that after the lunch, Erin told the guests she had a life-threatening cancer. He said Erin told him about a diagnostic test which had found a tumour. And the defence suggested that Erin had told the guests she had a suspected cancer. But Ian rejected this and said Erin was fairly clear that a cancer diagnosis was given. And the jury also heard about how the lunch guests were treated in hospital. While Don and Gail were at Dandenong Hospital, the toxicology department raised the possibility of death cap mushroom poisoning because of the delayed onset of symptoms. So there you go. That's a brief summary of day 6. Very important testimony from this man because he was there. He was there. So we'll be back. They'll be back tomorrow. I'll be back tomorrow. Thought I had a little news thing to show you, but to be honest, everything's been covered there. In that, everything's been covered there. So we don't really need to see anything else. So yes, I will be carrying on with this, talking about this case every day, updating right through to the end. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, please. And yeah, let me put my banner up. I'll see you really soon. in the next video. And until then, as always, be careful with your mushrooms, and I'll see you really soon in the next video. And may your God go with you. Bye.